so much of that is just you have to package it correctly, where you can kind of like Trojan horse it into the hardcore scene where, you know, if you do it this way, people are like, absolutely not. But as soon as you do it, like if there's Old English font, then it's like, oh, well, maybe I love this band. Like, you know, like that kind of thing. You just have to sneak it by them. Dude.
But yeah, without further ado,
I love that band.
Let's jump into the podcast. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. This is another episode of the Scoped Exposure podcast. Today, we are going to be fusing hardcore and hip hop and meeting in the middle with Brandon of Fox Lake. Thank you for joining me on the show, my guy.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I've been listening to the episodes to kind of brush up, and I'm excited, man.
Yeah. Brandon and I have been in the DMs kind of since October, November-ish, and we've been planning and trying to figure out timelines to sit down and do some chats. So glad we're finally here. For the few folks at home who might not know who you are or what you do in the band, can you give me a proper introduction and where you're based as well?
Yeah. So I play guitar for the band Fox Lake. We are based out of Denver, Colorado. We've been a band for around 3 years, 4 years in some form or another. The band kind of started off as a couple different combinations of a couple different things. It was, you know, two of the members were in one band, I was in another band, and then they were writing some demos, and as time kind of went on, it kind of evolved into something else. So there's not really a definitive time where we said this is the band now, but yeah, it's been about 3 years since we first kind of wrote our first songs and started working on it in its current iteration.
Yeah, and you guys recently in the last couple months put out an LP called Silence and Violence, and been on a constant repeat. Brandon actually just randomly sent me the masters and was like, hey, if you want to check this out. And, you know, sometimes like I get a plethora of that, but I think the way that you presented it was like, yeah, I'll give it a shot. And I was honestly blown away. So I'm definitely excited to be chatting about that release. Before we get super into the conversation, though, we got to check some bevs. So yeah. I'll let you go first as the guest of this show and tell me what you'll be sipping on.
So I just got a full gallon of this Arizona green tea, man. I got this as a white elephant gift from some of my friends because I'm sober, and so whenever I hang out with a specific group of friends, they all get insanely drunk and they love to party like just animals. And so the joke is that I always have to have like a separate beverage because whenever we get together, they all bring 6-packs and they all, you know, they've got tons of booze. And nothing, and I'm always looking around for something to drink, and I end up with like tap water. So this was the joke, was that they were like, well, we'll get you a big old gallon of green tea, so next time we hang out, you'll have something to drink.
Yeah, and those ones will at least last you for a little bit. I'm not sure how much green tea you're taking on a daily basis.
I'll cruise through it pretty quick. This should last a couple days.
Yeah. It's kind of the same. Like this is the very first year around Christmas where I've actually made my own Christmas cookies. I did like a Zoom call with my mom and we like got it, but I was like, I really have to like, you know, put the brakes on this because when I was living at home years and years and years ago, it was like just eating so many cookies all the time. So got to pump the brakes. I'm drinking, you know, as far as a bev connoisseur, I believe you need to, you know, drink the bevs that you know, the rare finds, but also be always on the hunt and finding new things. So a little bit of context. So this is what I'm drinking. It's a sparkling water. I don't know how you say that last word. Can you help me out? It's Kefir. But it's a strawberry northern plant. So the brand called Loop, I've had they had like an orange juice, like it's like a super orange juice or something, and then they had all these other energy shots, but those those shots of like just straight ginger and lemon juice, that kind of
Yeah.
shit.
Yep.
So they started doing these, and yeah, I was just reading the side before we got on the call here, and apparently there's more than 2 billion gut-friendly bacteria on here. So
Man, that always cracks me up because like bacteria is literally microscopic. So like you see commercials and people talking about kombucha and stuff like that, and it's like there are trillions of. You're like, I don't know what that means, man.
Yeah.
Like,
I was like,
it's gibberish.
at first I was like, oh yeah, strawberry. That sounds like a fun fruity time. But now it's like this is probably going to be more of a a healthier drink, if anything.
Strawberry northern plant, whatever that's strangely vague.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I will say that. So, speaking of kombucha, I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but have you heard of GT Dave? I'm trying to remember what his thing. So there's these YouTubers that I watch. They did a video called The Kombucha King, which everyone listening should absolutely go watch it. So GT Dave is the guy who invented. I'm blanking on the brand of kombucha, but he GQ did this big video where he's in this like very modern house, and he's like, I don't move the chairs. Yep. And they did this whole video like goofing on him, and then they actually went and met him, and they like played up the bit. But he's just like a regular dude. But his name is GT Dave, and if you look on the kombucha bottle, it says like, founder GT Dave.
Yeah. I think because I think Cody Ko and Noel Miller.
Yeah. Those are the homies.
Yeah. Yep. I saw it. So I've seen that video, and it is hysterical because that guy, he looks like a robot. Like if there's ever someone that was a reptilian, it's like him and Zuckerberg, man. Like those two are just the weirdest, like inhuman aliens.
Yeah. My wife's big on the kombucha, but I don't know. It's not my go-to personally, but there's some good ones out there.
I have virtually never tried it, and I think at this point it's out of spite. Too many people have told me, and I'm like, I'll get to it when I get to it, man.
Right. It's almost like the effects of people being so pro like vegan or straight edge. You're like, like stop it, like chill out.
If I'm gonna get there, I'm gonna get there. But
straight up. Well, Brandon, I'm very excited to be chatting with you. Fox Lake has been a band that I see doing things a little bit different right now, and I feel like those bands that are trying new things and kind of trying to carve a new lane in the hardcore heavy space, I think should be talked about more because that's a little bit harder to do. But before we get super into that, gotta do your origin of how you got into heavy music. So take me back in time and tell me about the formative records moments for you, and we'll start there.
Cool. So I grew up and most of I think 3 out of the 4 of us in the band grew up in pretty strict religious households. And so, any kind of aggressive music was not really on our radar until we found, I was listening to the episode with Isaac, and it was the same kind of thing. You had to kind of find a way to sneak it in where it's like, oh no, As I Lay Dying, like I know what it sounds like, but this is actually a Christian band. You don't have to worry. And so it started off, like very, very early, like elementary school, getting into punk records like Rufio, AFI, stuff like that. And then that kind of evolves into more and more aggressive music. And I remember having a conversation with my older brother. We were listening to Rise Against, and I think it was Blood, Red, White, and Blue. One of the songs on their earlier records had like a screaming passage in it. And I was like, yeah, this is so cool. And I don't really know what it is about it, but I was just really excited. And I'm in like 3rd grade. And he was like, this is the part that I like the least. Like, I wish that they could get rid of all of this stuff.
Really?
And so he was not into any of that. But that kind of evolved into, Linkin Park. I heard on like an X Games PlayStation 2 video game soundtrack. And I got on my bike and I biked over to Barnes and Noble, which is like a bookshop, music shop, and picked up Hybrid Theory, like with my own, I like saved up, like biked over there, picked it up myself. And then, that gets you into stuff like Slipknot, that gets you into stuff like Under Oath, that gets you like all of those types of bands, Haste the Day. And then all of us were kind of like aware of hardcore, but it was more through the like the metalcore lens in terms of, you know, starting off with stuff like Asking Alexandria and Attack Attack and stuff like that. But you know, those bands were always touring with like For the Fallen Dreams and eventually Legend and stuff like that. That was a little bit on the heavier spectrum. And then also it was such a cool era with like MySpace deathcore and stuff like that. So you end up listening to the Chelsea Grin EP and the Doom EP from Job for a Cowboy. And like, you know, there's just all of this Elijah, all of this crazy music going on. And I think one of the things that I really was excited about back then that I kind of missed was not having sort of the preference, not having any intention behind it, where I don't, you know, I used to just be excited about music. It was just like, you know, like whatever band I like their logo, so I check it out.
Yeah.
And I think that's a little bit harder to find now, because you end up as people get more versed in anything, whether it's art or you know, whatever it is, you start to differentiate the differences in different things. So you have, you know, kind of more specific genres, and you start to refine it down to, okay, it used to be this is just aggressive music, and then it's like, okay, now it's hardcore, and now it's like beat down hardcore or punk hardcore or, you know, posy hardcore, straight at whatever. Like there's all these different, you know, very specific subgenres that kind of get trickled down into this like ultra refined thing. And now when I go into it, I'm looking for specific things, or I'm relating whatever I'm listening to those specific things. If I hear a band and I think, oh, this sounds like this reminds me of this. Whereas, you know, in 6th grade, I'm listening to the Doom EP in the same way that I'm listening to Hybrid Theory. Like it all kind of feels the same because you're just excited about it.
Yeah, I think that there is, you know, the more further down the rabbit hole you go, the more like you're like, oh, like this is Zion, like here's all these different things that I can get invested in. And I do think that you're right that, you know, you're like, okay, this is beatdown, and then you go even further and you're like, okay, there's like these super older like 90s or 80s beatdown bands,
exactly,
like Irate or whatever. So yeah, I think like some of that is really good because you can kind of see the vastness and how heavy music you know, goes really back in time, but there's a lot of things in the future that's to come, and to be excited about that. But, you know, at the same time, like being open and being like listening to the things where you're like, I know for sure, like, you know, gun to my head, I could probably say that there's, you know, these top 3 subgenres that I naturally gravitate to a little bit more, but there's still like bands that I'm like, okay, I want to learn this subgenre, because I think like this would always happen where a band would put something out and it would be, you know, that next branch off, and the first listen I'm not like in love with it, but I like the band so much that I'm like, I need to like listen to this 10 times over, no stops, so I can understand where the band was coming from when they wrote this riff, this interlude, had this, you know, So yeah, it's important to just force yourself.
I think it's important to be able to kind of recontextualize the sonic language that bands are trying to utilize, where you have, I mean, for example, when I was in high school and I was in kind of those more scene core bands, it was, you know, Rise Records was like, that was the end all be all. Like that was, if you were signed to Rise, that was success. And so, you know, listening to like Scarlett O'Hara and stuff like that, which was, starting from that place and then hearing bands like Terror and like Defeater, I was like, I don't get it. I don't understand what this is. I don't really understand the energy. You know, where's the like chug chug breakdown? This doesn't make any sense. And then as you kind of develop that encyclopedia of all the different sounds that are available, you can again start to kind of like reconnect different aspects of what you're listening to the point where you can have a connection to a new thing that didn't exist before. So I used to talk smack on a bunch of the hardcore bands that I absolutely like love now. And it's frustrating because I wish I could go back and shake myself and be like, give it a shot, man. Stop.
Yeah.
Like,
Shut your mouth.
Just have to listen
this
to
band
it.
is sick.
Like,
yeah. No,
yeah, come on, man.
It's honestly pretty funny because that stems in hardcore and heavy space, but also with other stuff. Because, you know, maybe this is a very Canadian example, but I think the world overall shits on Nickelback as being this like joke band, or like,
Yeah.
oh, you're from Canada, you must love Nickelback. But I'm like, have you listened to like the very first Nickelback record? There's some fucking riffs on that like if Terror
Yes.
or like any other like major hardcore band wrote, they'd be like, yeah, this is great. But, you know,
Yes,
just because it's Nickelback, it's like this thing. So I think like, you know, pulling those things back.
Absolutely.
That's a big thing for me too. You know, going back in time and listening to like, you know, like the earlier stuff that, you know, I'm similar with you in that sense where I, you know, Christian household. So I wasn't given like the Megadeths and the Godsmacks, but I'm like, man,
Exactly.
this is stuff that I really missed out on because I was like in that bubble for so long. So
yeah, it's definitely like, it's frustrating because I think to a certain extent there's a certain amount of legitimacy, which is unfair and it's frustrating. But I think that a lot of kids don't view, I think there's a kind of a specific route that is viewed and deemed as like legitimate in terms of like how you got into hardcore. And, you know, for a lot of kids, it's like, okay, if you weren't into punk and then you didn't get straight into hardcore, then like, you know, that's not real. If you didn't listen to 80s thrash early enough, then like, it's not legitimate. And like, I think that can seem like, that obviously contributes to a lot of elitism, but I think it's frustrating to see people exclude, you know, entire, like somebody's entire journey into something totally legitimate, where somebody is participating in the scene, somebody is, you know, like, you know, actively encouraging parts of the hardcore scene from a very real place based on how they got there, I think is frustrating. But, you know, I, despite my criticism of it, I definitely have found myself in that same place where I'm like, man, I, you know, really wish I would have gotten into Cannibal Corpse when I was a kid. Like, really wish I would have gotten into Death and like, you know, Mortician, like all these, you know, cool bands that like everyone else seemed to be aware of in like fourth grade somehow. But, you know, instead I'm listening to the Newsboys and DC Talk and all. Like,
Frack, yeah, the Veggie Tales.
There's a reference I don't think you ever thought you'd.
No, no. But that is very funny, and I do 100% agree. Like, I try to be as empathetic as I can, and I know that there are people who will never potentially check out this podcast because they know I'm a younger guy, so I didn't, you know, grow up listening to like the very first Madball record when it came out and like things like that. And some people will listen to those hardcore records because someone just has a greater tenure. Yet at the same time, I think a lot of people have checked out this podcast because it is like from a, call it, I don't know. I don't think I'm an older person or a younger person. I'm turning 28 in a few weeks here. Yeah. But I think like it's nice to have a more refreshing, you know, take on certain things versus like the old 100%. Head in the room. And I think, you know, I'm not trying to talk shit on any of the old heads because I think there's lots to learn from those people. But I think at the same time, you know, kids who are 16, 17, 18, and they're like, this is how I got into hardcore, I think that's just as relevant. And there's enough to learn for new bands as far as like, how are people consuming music? How are people like listening 100%. To music? Yeah. So,
and I think criticizing that, again, like the quote unquote old heads, it's like there's just as much frustration on that as there is admiration. And I think because there's a ton of records that I never would have listened to if I hadn't seen like the cool guys that I looked up to in the scene, you know, wearing a Madball t-shirt, you know, like, you know, repping 787 play, like all that stuff. Like that's the kind of stuff that wouldn't have even been on my radar if those people hadn't presented it to me, even inadvertently, not directly. And so, but again, so much of that depends on being able to understand that sonic language with enough kind of like history. So, if I'm in third grade and somebody handed me, like a Full of Hell record, I would have thrown it in the trash. But once you've gone through the necessary steps, like once you've listened to enough and you can kind of put that all together, then all of a sudden that stuff starts to make sense. And then you say, oh, I understand why, this like 33-year-old dude still going to shows is like repping this band so hard.
Yeah. I think like a lot of people underestimate their influence in hardcore, whether they are,
Mm-hmm.
a 22-year-old person in kind of like a hype band right now, or they are a 35-year-old
Exactly.
who has been in hardcore for so long. So I think, you know, talking about the bands that you do like really matters, because some people are like I'm guilty of this. I follow certain people within the hardcore space, and when they share a demo that I'm like, I don't know this band, I'm
100%.
like, there's, you take that and then you take someone else who, might be in hardcore, but they don't have as much influence. Like there's always different things at play to put people onto new bands. You wear one shirt, in a podcast, there might be someone watching who's like, I don't know who that Fuming Mouth band is, and then they go check it out and they
Exactly.
realize how great of a band that is. So,
Yeah.
I think the constant being thoughtful of like, not like intentionally being like, I'm wearing this shirt so people will listen to this band, but like thinking about that, shouting out the people that you want to when you have those moments too, and just being like stoked on hardcore, because everyone's got their
Yeah.
different levels of call it social media presence, but I think utilizing and being a constant support of one another does I don't think that there's any losses in that. I think it's only wins for people.
Yeah. And I completely agree. I think that there's a difference between support and like performance, and that can start to turn into a fine line where it's like, if you're really going through your closet before the show, like, all right, who's going to be there? What am I going to like,
Right.
what kind of show is it? Should I wear this shirt? And like, I am super guilty of that every once in a while, where I'm like, I'll kind of catch myself and be like, man, you're putting a lot of effort into this. Like, like if you own the shirt, then like you care about that band. And so it doesn't matter what shirt you're wearing where or who's around, like you're just going to the show.
Mm.
And so I think that, sometimes I've seen bands, and it's a fine line to walk, where you legitimize yourself through kind of association, where, it's more about, okay, who are we shouting out? Who are we, what circles are we trying to stay in very specifically through, kind of intentional action, versus like, we're just excited about this band. We're excited about this band, and, we're whatever it is. So again, there's that fine line between just general excitement about hardcore, like you said, like you're just stoked on whatever, versus kind of intentional performance. And that's hard. It's a hard line to walk.
Yeah. And I think you can have I don't know. I think you have to check yourself to not like call out like that kind of stuff. But like, cause you, even if you see something, it's like, well, my gut tells me this. Like, I think, that doesn't really matter at the end of the day. I think you just need to make sure you're in check and being like, do I have influence either through a band or a platform or whatever, and am I using that to better my community? Even if you're like just a casual show goer, like I have plenty of those friends who are very avid for like putting out new music, and I know that their friend circles aren't just in the heavy space. So I think it all matters to constantly be promoting one another, and just like the as corny as this sounds, the spirit of hardcore. So
100%.
So Brandon, I've been enjoying these chats, but I definitely want this podcast to hit on the music stuff that you're a part of as well. So you play in a band called Fox Lake, and you put out a LP like I mentioned earlier, and I feel like the vibe of what you guys are doing, like I said before, is like very in its own lane, and I think that's really healthy to see versus like a lot of other I guess subgenres that are off of what you guys are doing, and hardcore, metalcore, even beatdown. So talk to me about that release specifically, and just like how you guys wanted to market that and package that together and just create the vibe of that band.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, thank you. Second off, I think when we started, again, it was kind of offshoots of a couple different bands. We had some demos lying around, and our vocalist Nathan kind of came. We had a song that was written, and he was trying to figure out what to do vocally, and he kind of sat us down and was like, I think I might want to rap on this. Like, what would you guys think about that? And when we started, it was like, yeah, we'll throw in like one verse, but we'll still be like, it's still heavy. Like, we'll still be a heavy band, but like we'll have like maybe one rap part. And then as we started doing it, it became so organic in terms of like, that's just kind of the vibe that we were feeling. That's what was getting us excited. And so we kind of started chasing that feeling unintentionally. We were like, when he would have a really cool verse that would sit on the top of something that was more groove based, that we were like, oh man, we got to write, then we'll put this in the second verse. And that just kind of kept the wheels rolling. Whereas when we were just writing, a mosh part, we would get excited, but it was kind of like, that's what that is. And so the whole band kind of started off as an experiment in terms of, how can we accomplish having these different sounds that a lot of times stand in the face of one another. Like, I think one of the hard parts that we've always encountered is trying to be a heavier band. You immediately get associated with kind of like the new metal or new metal core or whatever. There's a lot of different bands doing that kind of thing, and unfortunately there's a lot of them that it feels gimmicky, or it can come off just like cringy. And I know for a fact that there are a lot of people that immediately, and I don't fault them for this, but immediately as soon as they hear rapping over heavy music, it's like, I'm out. Like that's a line that for some people just is like, no thanks, I don't need any of that in my hardcore. Like, just give me the hardcore. But I think, there were a set of, I don't want to say rules because that puts it in a box, but when we first started writing and we were experimenting with the rapping, we knew exactly what we didn't want to do a lot more than we knew what we did want to do. We knew where we didn't want to take it. We knew what we didn't want it to be associated with. And so it was a very intentional kind of avoidance of specific tropes and stuff like that, which was cool because it left, when you say, okay, we're not going to do this, that means we have all of this other stuff that we are going to do. So as opposed to trying to put us in a box and saying, okay, we are going to be a hardcore band, we are going to be a metalcore band, we're going to be an X, Y, or Z band. Like, all of us listen to so much different music and take inspiration from so many different things, and go to hardcore shows twice a week, or some of us like almost not at all. And so there's all these different kind of inspirations and ways that we can build from different places. And the coolest thing is that we've never said we want to do this more, or we want to do this less, or anything like that. It's always been, we kind of know what we're avoiding, and then anything else is fair game.
And I feel like that
we can have, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I feel like that is as crucial as, knowing kind of what you want to do. Like, do you want to have do you want to have a bunch of fast songs, or like what's the production quality that you want to kind of stay within? I think everyone has their thing that they want to, for me, like, I've definitely, over the multiple bands that I've been a part of, like, I would say the song lengths have definitely just gone down in time over time, because I just have like no patience on like hearing something that, is like over, 4 or 5 minutes. Like, it's very few and far between where it's, I'll just plug, there's this band from Toronto that just put out an EP. It was an album. It's called Problem Child, but the band's called Real World. And the first song after the intro is like 5.5 minutes. And I was listening to it. I was like, what the fuck is going on? Like, it hits on all these different things, and it doesn't get boring. So I want to plug Real World, for really being ballsy and putting a 5.5 minute song as the, initial debut.
As
But
like right off the intro.
yeah, I'll shoot it to you after the pod. But I do think that
Please.
it's really important to like you said, like know what you don't want to do, but then like you said, you have all these options. Um, and I do think that it's interesting, like you said, like there are people that just hear rapping or just like a vocal style that's very fast that could be considered rapping, but they're just out. But like I was listening to the newest Neverending Game, and I'm just like, man, like
Mm-hmm.
there's like almost more rapping than like hardcore like
Yeah.
spitting on that record,
God, that
which
record's
is
good.
like, yeah, it's crazy. So it's strange to hear.
And yeah, I think so much of that is just you have to package it correctly, where you can kind of like Trojan horse it into the hardcore scene, where if you do it this way, people are like, absolutely not. But as soon as you do it, like if there's Old English font, then it's like, oh, well, maybe I love this band, like like that kind of thing. You just have to sneak it by them. And I think that's one of the things that we've been most excited about is like so much of the criticism and stuff that we've gotten on the record. I shouldn't say criticism, so much of the feedback that we've gotten on the record is that people, they kind of expect one thing, and then based on the album art, and then they hear the first couple minutes of Tunnel Vision, and they say, oh, okay, so I think I know what this, it's like, this sounds like a Mirror, this sounds like Hacktivist, whatever. And then we have a couple of these riffs where it's like, well, hold on, no, that's not quite what I thought it was.
Right.
And then as you get X number of songs deep, down to the last breakdown in IYKYK, the last track on the record, there's curveballs throughout the album, and sonically it's not consistent enough to say, okay, this sounds like X, Y, or Z band. And that's something that we've been very intentional about. We don't want to write, we're already writing for the full length, and we're hoping to put out some new music here in a couple months. Don't quote me on that, but I think we've got songs that sound everywhere from like orthodox, like System of a Down type stuff, just faster, riffy, but like thick riffs. And then we've got some stuff that's more Absence of Mind, more Turnstile, more like Trapped Under Ice, kind of like dance riffs almost, that are just head bob. We've got some stuff that's straight up Rage Against the Machine, where we're trying to see how accessible can we make music without sacrificing anything, without pulling any punches, to make it available to a wider audience. So that's something that we've always been excited about, is being able to have as many, like stuff like Fuming Mouth, you're never gonna hear something from a Fuming Mouth record directly onto our album. You would never compare Fox Lake to Fuming Mouth, but like I listen to The Grand Descent all the time. Like I love that album, and their new EP is insane. And so there's sonically, it absolutely influences the way that I play guitar. And you can, there's times where I'll turn on an album, and then I'll kind of be playing along, and then I'll pause the album because you hear something, and then you kind of workshop a riff, and next thing you know, something from like a grind band, like a deathcore band, or like whatever you want to call it, goes to again like a metalcore, or like hip hop hardcore, in a way that's not recognizable. Like you would never be able to trace that back. But
yeah, I think I like the term that you use, like having curveballs within your music that aren't so segregated from like everything else you guys are doing, but it's enough to be like, you're on the roller coaster, and then you hit that like sharp turn, and you're going straight down, and then you come up. Like I feel like, like I hesitate from getting to the point where I'm doing like reactions to like new music, but I honestly, like if I'm in the car and I'm listening to any new music, and then this like just out of nowhere, like the guitar's cut out and it's bass and drums, like my mouth is just like, are you serious? So like I think some of those like really opportune times to really like think about like, okay, we know what we want to do, but how can we like always keep people on their toes with our music? Yeah.
And one of the challenges that's brought is trying to make sure that it doesn't sound random, and it doesn't sound out of place. Like we don't ever want to write.
It's a very fine line with like not being I played in a band once with this guy who was like, he was very critical of like how some hardcore bands would just be stapling riffs together. Like there wouldn't be any
Yeah.
flow. It would just be
Yep.
like, here's this riff, and then it's like, and then it's to the next thing. So I think,
Yeah.
I think there's, there's a lot of bands who, I think that's why I love crossover so much, because it's like such few riffs, but there's so many different
Yeah.
types of beats and flows that you can do within that. We're kind of all over the place, but one thing I did want to touch on what you said is your vocalist will have. It seems like you guys work in multiple ways where he might have a verse or an entire song done, and then you're working the music around that, or has it also happened the other way where you guys build a song and then he's because a lot of the riffs aren't super, like there are some that are very intricate, but there are some that are very like simple and simplistic, and I'm sure that's been intentional for the lyrics and the
100%.
flow to shine.
So typically the process is I've got my little like studio setup, and so I'll demo out a song, kind of top to bottom. So we'll have the DNA of the whole song ready to go, and then I'll bring it to practice, and I like, obviously I'm not a drummer, and so I'll hand it to the drummer and he'll be able to kind of, spice parts up, and we'll say, okay, this actually sounds a little bit weird. Let's turn this into a 2-step, or that, like this riff kind of comes out of nowhere. Let's work out a transition. But, and then vocally, what usually happens is we'll kind of we'll build on that framework to the point where it's, 80% done. And then as he's writing, he can say, oh, like I'm stuck in a really solid flow. Let's extend that verse a little bit. Or,
okay.
Just recently we had a song where I had written this like weird riff that I was like super jazzed on, because it was nothing that I had ever like done before. Sure. I was like super into it. And then we had this almost like power trip kind of like thrash, like emptier part after it, which is really, and we were super excited about it, and we wanted to capitalize on that riff. And he was saying vocally, I just don't really hear how we can kind of build up to this next point comfortably, because the riff is so strange. There's not like vocally, I can't really like settle into that to be able to build to the next part. Mm-hmm. And so we ended up kind of workshopping that. So that's typically where he'll be able to kind of put his 2 cents in terms of like the song. And then he'll be able to go through and kind of write everything out once we've made those changes. And then it's more of a collaborative thing. Yeah. But yeah, so it's definitely cool to be able to work with everyone on that. And it's cool because we are on the same page way more often than we're not, which is not something that I'm used to. I've been in other bands before where it's kind of always somebody's fighting for one thing or another. And that is so rare, which is really, really cool. And typically we can find something that everyone's excited about. And if we're not all jazzed on it, then like we don't really push. There's probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 different songs that we have written that are good, but we don't feel like this is exactly what we want. And that's one of the reasons that we put out the 8 songs on Silence and Violence with the 2 interludes, as opposed to just trying to like pad the track listing. We didn't want to put out a 12-song record that only had 6 good songs. So, and that's hard. That's definitely hard, because you'll put time and effort into something, and then it's like, we're just never going to use it. And you're like, okay, well.
Yeah. Well, like I think sometimes like you can, point to my book, or not my bookshelf, my camera shelf, but you can shelf songs, and then like over time, it's like the one riff that was the missing piece that brings it all
100%.
together. So that's very cool.
100%.
So I know on the latest release, you guys had a couple features, and I think a question that's warranted to ask, because you guys are tapping into that hip hop rapping side. If there was ever a dream collab for Fox Lake, and to have a vocal feature, on that, Anthrax, Public Enemy level, like, no, the sky's the limit. Who would your personal pick be?
Ours, we actually just completely out of curiosity and more as a joke, but we sent an email to Killer Mike from Run the Jewels. Okay. So like Killer Mike would be insane. Like Zach De La Rocha, obviously, huge inspiration if we could like, and it's more stuff that we think would fit well. And so having somebody with that more aggressive delivery and also kind of like politically lining up, although that's not hard to find because there's a lot of comparisons between hip hop and hardcore in terms of like the sort of social stances. But Killer Mike, we've been listening to Royce da 5'9" a ton. There's a rapper who's actually from Denver named Old Man Saxon. I'm going to plug him, and he's fantastic. A lot more like boom bap, kind of like chill stuff. But like if there's ever a place where we can put it in, like that's the kind of stuff that's like, you know, we would love to be able to bridge that gap. I'd say probably Killer Mike would take the cake. I think that'd be better. And LP, both of them.
Yeah, I think that is pretty crucial to like have that like raw like energy, like, you know, versus if it was like Drake, he'd be like, oh, I'm so sad, like it just wouldn't fit very well.
Yeah, we've got crazy riffs, and then you have to bring the energy down like a ton to match where they're at down here, and then you have to figure out how to get all the way back up. But oh man.
And I do believe that it's really cool to, you know, talk about those things, because who knows if Zach is like, yeah, you know, in 2021, I do want to like kind of go back down into this like very like smaller music scene, because that would be insane, mind blowing. So,
and that's almost the way that we wound up on management with our manager Bill and the label with Modern Empire. We hadn't really anticipated Silence and Violence being like a label release. We recorded it in our buddy's bedroom. He did an unbelievable job, so it doesn't sound like that. But it was over the course of a couple months. You know, it was like we do a Saturday here and then a Sunday here and whatever, and kind of pieced it together. And then we were sitting on the album, and we were like, you know we didn't want to just kind of like drop it out of nowhere, but more as an exercise. We sent out emails to a couple different places. And we've all been in the scene for a long time. So we've got a lot of connections with different people, you know, everyone knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody kind of thing. And so we kind of followed some of those trails down to, you know, to be able to get in contact with a couple different people. And next thing you know, we're hearing back from a manager, we're hearing back from a booking agent, we're hearing back from the label. And it was kind of like, oh, like, okay, awesome. We did not really anticipate that. And so it's cool to be able to have that. And so, you know, exactly like that, like you were saying with Zach, if you never know, we sent those emails kind of just out of curiosity. And then next thing you know, somebody's like, actually, sure. You know, we'd love
to, it just takes one.
You know, we love the record and we'd love to sign. Like, exactly.
Yeah. I
and
think
that's what happened with Dan from, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think a lot of people get like in their mind, it's like, it has to be this label. It has to be this. And like, just send out 100 emails, and then maybe one person, maybe 3 get back to you, and then maybe 1 actually does it. And if it's not that 100, do another 100. Like, you know, always thinking like just trying and putting yourself out there. And, you know, for a lot of people, that's a very like scary thing to do, is like always getting that rejection, but like always believing if you think your shit is fire, then just like someone else 100%. Is going to do that. And, you know, even if it's not now, keep doing it in 5 years, and I'm sure someone will see that. You were talking about Daniel from Gideon, I'm guessing.
Yeah, to kind of finish that thought, that was essentially what happened with him as well. Our drummer is like the biggest Gideon super fan, but he also has gotten the chance to hang out with them. And so it's kind of evolved into like, you know, more of a friendship acquaintance kind of thing where, you know, it started off where he was just like, oh my gosh. But he went and saw them a couple times and was able to, you know, to chat with them. And then they started recognizing him. And so, you know, he was able to kind of forge a legitimate interaction with those guys. And we were again bouncing back and forth on features that we wanted. We had this kind of emptier part because we knew that we wanted somebody vocally to like really, to make that thing pop in Codename. And so we just sent an email to Gideon's manager, and Dan actually just messaged our drummer Griffith directly, because they follow each other on social media and stuff, and was like, hey, I hear you guys were looking for a feature. I'd love to do that. We make it happen. And so again, it was something that we weren't sure if he was, even like able based on the label or management or anything like that, or interested in hooking us up with a feature. And is insanely kind of him, and it really made the song like that's one of our favorite parts of the record by far.
Yeah, when you sent it to me, I was like kind of going through. I was like, oh, Daniel, and like Gideon is a huge band to me specifically. They came through. This was many moons ago, but they were on tour with 100th. This is like back in like 2012, maybe. Or maybe 2011, but they stayed at my house, and I remember specifically
no way.
The other Daniel who was playing guitar. I'm not gonna even try to pronounce his last name. It's like McCarthy or something. But I remember specifically like that band has influenced my songwriting and a lot of some other projects I was doing. So I remember specifically Jake was like in my shower freaking out about the tea tree shampoo that I had because it was buzzing his hair. And then,
it gives you like tingly hair.
And then Daniel was like showing me, this is just before they did Milestones, and he was showing me like on his laptop on like iTunes back when that existed, and he's like showing me he was showing me Still Alive, and I was like freaking out. I was like, who's that voice? And then that's how I got put on the Kublai Khan, and like that band has been huge for me. So I actually have Matt's Matt from Kublai Khan's lyrics of that song tattooed on my feet. So that's huge, so cool. Huge for me. I would love to have Daniel on the podcast at some point just to talk about.
Absolutely.
Yeah, band's done a lot for.
We definitely. I mean, like the Kublai Khan influence is very apparent in terms of like the songwriting, which again, kind of like we were talking about earlier, that's not, I don't think anyone would listen to us and be like, oh, that reminds me of Kublai Khan. It's kind of different camps, but the way that we approach a lot of the riffs and stuff, not only to make room for the rapping, but also just to give it more of a head bob kind of like streamlined feel. A lot of times, like the parts that hit hardest on some of the Kublai Khan records are the ones where they're not, crazy riffing. It's not fills all over the place. It's when you can just really like settle into the groove, and everyone, I mean, like watching them live, the whole room is like everyone's on the same page. And so being able to like, that's really what we wanted to capitalize on and that's kind of like for the band in general is hitting those parts where everyone's head is bobbing. Everyone's like, just like right locked into that pocket with you. And so similar to what the drummer from V Streets and Tsunami, he had a little bit where he was talking about you kind of got to strip it back a little bit, and there's parts where that's going to make it a lot more effective. Exactly.
Yeah, no, I think that there's a lot of like really good things there, like Kublai Khan, like I don't know, I feel like they don't get as much credit on how they influenced a lot of, call it heavier hardcore, just with what they did. 100%. I feel like it's I'll go on record to say I would argue it's probably as much. I don't think that they got to that level that Knocked Loose did, but I think that they did the same amount of influence, just because I remember seeing those like early Knocked Loose videos where they were playing in like a community center to like 20 kids, and I've seen those same videos with Kublai Khan, but like people were just freaking out because it's like, how are these like parts so heavy, but it's just dun, 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 like that's it.
Yep. Yeah. And like, I mean, so much of that is production, but like production only helps. It only gets you so far. You have to have a solid, strong structure. You have to have like really like the foundation needs to be there. And yeah, I mean, even going back to like 2x4 bands like that were doing that kind of like thicker, it wasn't down tempo, it wasn't beat down, but it was heavier than hardcore. And so no one really knew like, what do you call it? And so that's exactly the kind of stuff where we're trying to kind of find that niche where you can filter out some of the more, busier riffs and some of the crazier songwriting stuff to just have it punch as effectively as possible. And we just wanted to hit like a hammer every single time.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's so Kubla Khan, 2x4, I like, and Frost Coffin now, another unbelievable band, but like, which is again interesting because you'd never listen to it or you'd never listen to Silence and Violence and say, oh, this reminds me of Texas Death type riff, like it's because they're not there. But
right.
the energy and the intentionality behind it and the approach to songwriting is something that we definitely try to emulate.
Yeah, no, I'm happy that we got to hit on all those bands. If there's 3 of those that I would for sure want to have in season 2, it would be, Daniel from Gideon, Matt from Kublai Khan, and then someone from Frost Coffin. Because as soon as I saw them at Snow and Flurry, I was like, holy fuck, like this band is so damn catchy. So I
watch
itching
that so often.
I'm itching for a Frost Coffin LP. Well, Brandon, we gotta start wrapping it up here, but I did have this is gonna be a total veer off from the conversation. I saw a video that you guys did for a Halloween set where you guys were dressed as Can the Hat and Thing 1, 2, and 3. Can you break that down for me or for the people that might not have seen that video?
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. I don't even know where you would have found that. That's hysterical.
Before you say, the way that I research some of my guests is if they don't have, some bands want to start from scratch with like a new release, it's always in the tag. Mm-hmm. You go to the tagged photos and videos, and that's where you can go back in time and be like, oh, this band played this
That's
show.
where the dirt is. That's so funny. Yeah. That was one of the funnest shows that we've ever played, but there's a really, really cool community, specifically down in Colorado Springs, which is about an hour and a half outside of Denver. There's a venue down there called the Black Sheep with like, it's one of those home venues. I like, all the homies work there. They throw all the shows, they know all the people. And they have put on a couple different fests and things like that. Not unlike Snow and Flurry. Get a couple bands from the Midwest and things like that. It's an unbelievable venue. And so they put on a Halloween show and everyone was dressed up for their set. And I think most people did kind of like the casual Halloween thing where, like you wear like just a flannel and jeans and you say, oh, I'm a lumberjack. Like, it's just like whatever you had in your closet.
It's lazy.
And you kind of have to you just put a costume together and you're like, that's what it is. And we went to Spirit Halloween. We went to 2 different Spirit Halloweens actually, because one of them was sold out and we were like, walking through everything. There's like Fortnite costumes all over the place. And we're trying to figure out what we want to do. And we found this Cat in the Hat Thing 1, 2, and 3 costume, and we were just dying because they're these tiny short shorts, and they didn't have any in like an extra large, and so our bassist, his boxers are like poking out from under. it's like not even long enough to cover his underwear. Like, it was so hysterical. And one of our friends was dressed as Fred Durst, and we were sound checking. And she hopped up on stage and we started playing a little clip of break stuff, just because she was dressed the part. And that whole show was so much fun, and that whole venue deserves the world.
Yeah, no, I do think that there are go-tos for a lot of hardcore bands when it comes to like Halloween stuff, where they'll do the Kiss makeup or stuff like that. But
just do some corpse paint.
I think out of any Halloween band costumes I've seen, that is by far my favorite. So I have to applaud you on that one.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know how our vocalist didn't pass out, because that thing, it had to be 1 billion degrees in this like fur, like head to toe long sleeve,
right?
And like that hat, I don't know how it stayed on his head the whole time, man. What a blast.
It's just like toppling down,
flopping. Oh yeah. God, that was so much fun.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'll definitely splice in the clip here so people can at least get the idea of what that is.
Happy Halloween, motherfucker!
Well, Brandon, we can officially kind of do the last end question here on the podcast, and you've listened to a fair amount. It sounds like, so I'm sure you're ready for it. Tell me a favorite mosh story of yours. So, again, that doesn't need to be something that happened. It doesn't need to be Fox Lake related. It doesn't need to be happened to you. It could have just been something you see. Whatever is the first thing to your mind.
I was trying. I'm like trying to come up with one. None are really like that's the one. Like I have a couple. Like one of the first shows I ever went to, I was trying to impress a girl, and she brought me out to a show, and she was like a just mosh warrior, and it was my first like kind of hardcore show. I'd been to concerts before, but I hadn't really been to like a basement venue hardcore band show. And so I'm kind of out of my element. I don't really know what's going on. And I want to say it was Bury Your Dead and Throwdown. And Bury Your Dead started playing, and she started moshing, and she hit some kid in the forehead and broke her wrist. And the kid got like knocked out. And I was kind of standing on the edge of the pit, and I was like, I have never seen anything like this in my life. I don't understand what is going on. Like, I was like, that girl is terrifying, and I'm like very attracted to it, but like what, like this is so insane.
Right.
And then there's another one, it's one of my favorite. We have like in the band, there are certain songs and bands and things like that that just bring the demons out of us, and so we always try to warn each other, and it's like, heads up, man, if you're anywhere near me during this song, I'm going to hurt you. And
right.
It's because it's like because I know that I can hit you, and it's like a fun thing for the two of us, and
right.
So we'll get violent. And so that boundaries came again to the Black Sheep. They came, and they hadn't played Cross My Heart yet on the new album, and so I didn't think that they were going to do it, and they hadn't played it live. And but I told our drummer, I was like, hey man, if they play Cross My Heart in that last breakdown, I'm gonna hurt you, and I'm going to be mean about it. And he was kind of like, all right, man, we'll see. Like, you talk a big talk, we'll see what happens. And they got into the intro, and I just grabbed him, and I was like, it's happening. And same thing happened with our vocalist and the drummer. The drummer gets beat up a little bit. He gets bullied a lot. But our
he's
vocalist
the punching bag
said the same
band.
thing.
Yeah.
A little bit. He brings it on himself. He's the sweetest person alive, and also just the absolute worst. We were gonna go see, it was I Am, Kubla Khan. I think it was on the Despised Icon tour.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I think Ingested, but it was I Am and Kubla Khan. And I want to say it's during Peel Back the Skin. There's this one riff that our vocalist is just like that's what heavy music is. Like, this is the one.
Right.
He's like, if they play that part, I'm gonna hurt you. And like, luckily the drummer is the sweetest dude alive, and so he takes it. He was like, all right. So he didn't run off. He was like, here we go. But yeah, we've all got a couple of those songs where it's like, just as a heads up, it's going to get violent, and it's going to be on you.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to be taking the brunt of this.
Yeah. I feel like you painted that perfectly. Like, this song brings the demons out of me, and just like, at least giving your homies a fair warning of like, this is my possession song. So please forgive me if hell,
I'm not responsible.
If hellfire rings down because of it. Well, Brandon, this has truly been a blast. I'm really glad that we finally got to connect, and it sounds like, there's a lot of really cool things that you guys are working on. I lost your video, and we're back.
Oh no!
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
You're all good.
Okay.
Is there
Perfect
anything
timing.
that you want to plug, shout out, send people after this podcast? The floor is yours for whatever you got.
Awesome. Yeah, let's see. We're in the process of writing. We're going to be heading to the studio in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that. So we're trying to have music out ASAP, and specifically with COVID, just trying to keep content flowing, trying to get stuff out as much as possible. So we'll have new music coming soon. Trying to do a full length by the end of the year, but we'll see how that goes. We've got new merch coming. We just restocked on merch. If you want to check out the online store, foxlake.band. There's a bunch of awesome bands in Colorado right now that are just super killing it. And two that come readily to mind are Mouth for War and Mind's Eye. If you can have anyone from either of those bands on the podcast, that would be killer.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's about it. Just trying to stay on the grind and keep streaming Silence and Violence. Keep checking out the music videos. Let us know what you think. I'm legitimately so curious all the time to see what people have to say for all the reasons that we talked about. I think some people dislike it, and if you do, then I want to know why.
Yeah. No, and I think like recognizing, the thing is not everyone is going to give a fuck about your music, but the people that do, and especially I think the more that you delve into your own lane, the more cult fans that you're going to get. So I'll consider myself one of those fans. I'm really excited to see what you guys do next. And thank you so much again for coming on. And I'll leave you to your giant green tea.
I got some drinking to do. I'm a little bit behind.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for listening.